What happens when four horror characters come together in DC Comics? Well, we get Creature Commandos. So let's get started. Book starts off in Truman's grocery store 2 weeks from now, and we see this one character who is going through a whole bunch of what looks like books or even cereal boxes, and then another character that looks like a werewolf, and she says to him, "Don't die on me now, Velcro." We then get the introduction of a couple of other characters, such as someone who looks like a Medusa, and her name is Mina, and Wanda, who is the werewolf. And like we mentioned before, Velcro, who is the vampire. Now, these characters seem to have a neck bracelet on, and it starts to make a sound, or it seems like it's hurting them. So they call for someone, and that someone is Lucky. Now, Lucky barges in with his gun, and he says Lucky is here. But in the instance of his arrival, there's some collateral damage, and he ends up unaliving a little girl. Now again, the rest of the team ensure that it was all an accident and Lucky is still a good boy. We then transition to the now, and again, what we experienced was about 2 weeks ahead of time. And we see Dr. West, and Dr. West seems to be working on someone, but also talking to someone named Jason. Now we see Mina come in, and she looks very different than when we saw her in the beginning of the book. And Mina asks who is Jason. Now, the doctor doesn't really tell her, but then the doctor says, "Are you trying to read my mind? That's a breach of trust." And then Mina is saying, "No, I just..." And then they're interrupted by a general who pops in. Basically, the general is asking for updates, and he's saying that with all of the money that's been going into this project, I better see some results ASAP. But he lets her know that there's an emergency and we need to get a team together really fast. We then transition to Matthew Strive, and he's talking to Mina and the doctor's crew and basically telling them what to do, and then the doctor's telling him, "Don't tell my team what to do." He then tells her that he's here to command her creature unit, and he's seen a lot weirder, so let's get this going. They then have banter back and forth about science and also the supernatural, and the doctor's like, "Well, I don't believe in the supernatural either, that all things can be explained through the process of science and the scientific method." He then asks her if you got a team together already, and she basically says not fully, but they're getting them together. So they're on their way to recruit the next member. We then transition to Chicago, Illinois, where we see a familiar character that we saw in the beginning of the book, and this one is Vincent Velcro. Now, they sent a whole bunch of guys to watch him, and the doctor says, "Well, I'm using them to catch him," and the general and the lieutenant is like, "What?" Basically, what's happening is she armed all of them with UV rays, and this simulates the rays of the actual sun. Now, the goal is not to incinerate him, but to trap him. So there's multiple soldiers or these mercenaries of sorts that are working with the government who then entangle him in I would say a gun infraction, right? Where many guns are pointing towards around him to create this kind of prison of sorts. Now the doctor comes in and says, "We need you to work for the government. We need your abilities." And he's like, "What makes you think I'm going to do that?" And she's like, "Well, if you commit to successfully finishing this mission and also the program, I can give you something." So she leans over and she whispers to him, and then he automatically says, "I'm in." When he says that, the next stop is Detroit. We then move over to this guy who seems like he's getting pulled over by the cops, and they ask him where you're going, and he mentions something about a girlfriend, but they don't believe him, and they said, "Don't make this harder." And the next thing we see is just some really big gigantic teeth, and then whoever this person is says he's not. Now we see the werewolf looking character, and as soon as she's about to jump on these cops, she gets entangled by the doctor and her men, and also Shreve. Now this character's name is Wanda, but we already knew this since the beginning of the book. And the doctor says, if you work for us in exchange for your service, that we'll be able to release your sister from prison. And the doctor further goes on to say that no one was hurt when she firebombed that Aryan Brotherhood office. And Wanda says, you can do that? And the doctor really brings up a great quote: I can do anything. Together, we can do everything. And Wanda says, deal. Now, a little bit later, we see this Frankenstein looking character, and we also see Mina, who is taking care of him. And we see the general behind the scenes, and they're introducing in a comedic way, but our main characters are not really having it. And they say, looks like we rounded up a werewolf and a vampire. Got a whole platoon of creeps now. And they introduce all of them as the creature unit. Now, our characters basically say, like, we're not in it for this country. We're not doing it for any reason. And they acknowledge it and say, well, we'll give you all of the rewards as soon as you take care of this mission and all your duties. Now, we then transition to an island off the skeleton coast of Nambia, where we see this really muscular woman, and she's talking to this crew of men and telling them that you have your orders. Now, it seems like they're going into this room to beat down or even unalive this creature of sorts. Now, it looks like a vampire, but it also looks very different as well, so I'm not too sure. And they start the process of beating it down, and then you hear the doors close and they're all yelling for help. Apparently, this was all a test set by that same muscular woman. And she starts to walk and she reports to someone that we've seen before. This is the same general that we saw in the beginning of the story who was talking to the doctor. And basically, that muscular woman and the general are talking to someone who says, General Eiling, which is the general that we've seen 2 times now, your government is playing out a bit of game theory against me. All the minds of the Pentagon combined can't see my next move coming. And we're wondering, who are they talking to? Who is saying this? And the general says, I'll keep things on track. And when we switch to the next panel, we find out that who they're talking to is Brainiac. And Brainiac says, well, good. Within the next 72 hours, my weapons will be capable of walking through any metal detector and into any space on the globe. So, apparently something really big is happening and Brainiac is behind the scenes. But what's really cool is that we got this new team and they look pretty darn cool. And this is the perfect month to introduce such a horrific team. I can't wait to get to know more of these characters, how they work in terms of the synergy, and of course it does seem like a Suicide Squad, but a different type of Suicide Squad. So let me know if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of this team.